Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And today I'm going to be making my Asian orange chicken. And the reason I put quotes around that is because most of this kind of food is actually American food, you know, Asian foods that we've Americanized because they don't typically, the Chinese don't typically fry their foods like we do. But this is my own personal version, my very own recipe, and I haven't made it actually in years. And it's kind of funny because I pulled out my old recipe and I'm like, wow, I do things really differently now. So I'm actually rewriting the recipe as I'm putting this together, and I will be putting the written recipe in a link down below. That's going to go over to our Patreon page. That is totally open and free to all. So all you have to do is click on that link and you'll be able to open up the written recipe so you can copy and paste it. And if you decide to share it, just please let people know where you got the recipe from. So we're going to get started on the sauce. Now, what I've got here is a little better than a cup of fresh squeezed orange juice, and with the pulp. I like all that pulp in there, but if you want, you can strain out the pulp. You don't have, you can just keep it clean orange juice without pulp, but I like as much orangey stuff in there as I can get. So I'm going to go ahead and pour that into my saucepan. It's got a stainless steel with a good heavy bottom. And I'll be cooking this on my wood stove, but you can do this on your range. In case I forget to say it later, make sure you cook it on a low to medium heat. And then to that, I'm going to be adding 2 cups of water. Now I've actually decreased the water amount and increased the orange juice amount from when I first came up with this recipe, so I can get more of that orange flavor in there. So 2 cups of water, and that is my filtered rainwater that I'm using. That's all we ever consume is the rainwater we collect. And then I'm also, for even more orange flavor, I'm going to add a few tablespoons, up to a 1/4 cup of orange peel. So, you know, or orange zest. I just dehydrate up the peel and then pulverize it. And when I do this, I make sure I only use the peels from organic oranges, not the non-organic, which we can't always get around here. So let's move on to our other ingredients. So the next one is going to be a 1/3 cup of whatever homemade vinegar, or even the Bragg's apple cider vinegar is what I would recommend that you want to use in this. If you happen to have get a lot of organic oranges and you make your citrus vinegar out of organic orange peel, I recommend using that in this because that would get even more of your wonderful organic, your wonderful orange flavor in there. So anyway, a 1/3 cup of the vinegar. Okay, and then to this, you're going to use either some Bragg's liquid aminos, or, which when I do this, you can see back there, I have a gallon jug. I always buy the liquid aminos, whether it be the coconut aminos or the Bragg's liquid aminos. I buy them by the gallon, and then I just keep these handy and fill them with a little funnel. So you can use the Bragg's liquid aminos, but today I'm going to use the coconut aminos. Now keep in mind that if you decide to use the coconut aminos, they are not as salty. Again, this is a 1/4 cup. In fact, I'm going to put just a little bit more than that, so it's closer to the 1/3 cup. So if you're using coconut aminos, then I recommend you also add a teaspoon of salt. If you're using the Bragg's liquid aminos, which is a soy-based product, this is why I say this, because some people try to avoid soy completely, where this is the only soy product we use at all here. But anyway, if you're going to do the coconut aminos, I recommend adding a teaspoon of some good healthy salt to that. So that's going to be either like your red mineral salt, which I have right here, or your pink Himalayan salt. And those are rich in minerals. So both of those are a really good option. Okay, now a couple more herbs and spices here. We're going to put in, and if you've got fresh ginger, you can get fresh ginger because you either grow it or get it locally. And you can get a good organic one. I recommend adding some fresh ginger, but that's harder for us to come by. So I'm putting a couple tablespoons of the powdered ginger. This is going to feed at least 4 people, probably more. Again, I haven't made it, I don't think I've made it since my kids were living here in the home. And then a couple tablespoons of granulated garlic. Again, you could just use some fresh chopped garlic and put that in there. I always, when I'm throwing stuff like this together, I do like to use the granulated garlic quite a bit because it's just easy, especially when I'm making a sauce. So the ginger, the soy sauce or coconut aminos, and the garlic are what's going to really add that nice Asian type flavor you think of. In fact, I can already smell it. It smells wonderful. Now, if you prefer to have a little spice, a couple things you can do is either add maybe a teaspoon to a tablespoon of cayenne pepper in the powdered form, or you can do a tablespoon or two of the red pepper flakes, and these are hot. Okay, now the next ingredient again is going to be entirely up to you. You can use up to a cup of brown sugar, which sounds like a lot, but for me, I'm going to be using a cup of the coconut sugar. And if you're going to be using like regular brown sugar, even if it's the homemade kind, I recommend going less on the sugar, because I keep wondering if that's a typo, because that just sounds like a lot of sugar. But it is supposed to be a sweeter flavor to it. So we're going to put about a cup of the coconut sugar, because coconut sugar is far less sweet than your regular cane sugar or, you know, brown sugar. But the other option too is if you're experienced at working with like stevia or your monk fruit sugar, which I'm not yet. I only recently bought this to try it out, and I finally found one that was pure monk fruit sugar extract and didn't have the other ingredients in it, like that, whatever that one is, that chemical they tend to add to make it cheaper, and I try to avoid it. And this was a good price I was able to get on the subscribe and save. So hopefully it's still available. If you want to try this one out, I'll go ahead and link to it down below. But I do know the ratios are going to vary. So I'm thinking maybe a teaspoon tops. But those of you who work with this kind of stuff would know better than me, because I still haven't really experimented with it yet. That is always an option if you're trying to go sugar-free entirely. Okay, so then the ingredient that you're going to need to thicken up your sauce is some either arrowroot powder or tapioca starch. Now, originally when I written this recipe, it shows you how old it is, I was still using cornstarch back then, and I haven't used cornstarch in years. And so I switched to this one here is actually the arrowroot powder, and this is the one I get right here. I also get this on subscribe and save through Amazon to get a fairly decent price. So, but I don't know if you can find these kind of stuff in your health food stores at an even cheaper price. We don't have anything like that around here, so I tend to rely on Amazon quite a bit. So I'll put my affiliate link down below to this particular brand here, and if you use your subscribe and save, you can save up to another 15%. So of the starch, whichever one you choose to use, you're going to need a 1/3 cup. And I'm using my hand to measure with because my measuring cup is wet. Oh, and if you're interested in learning how you can use your hands for measurements, I just started a video series on kitchen tips and tricks. And in that, my first installment that I'll link to in the description box down below, please don't forget to hit show more to see all our links, on how you can learn how to use your hands for measurements. You're also going to want some fresh green onions or dehydrated green onions. You can add that in now, especially if they're dehydrated. But if you're using fresh, like I'm going to be doing, I recommend you add those last. Wait until you're all done, and then you put your sauce over your chicken, and then sprinkle the green onions on top. So what I have here are some green onions I got. Believe it or not, at the time I'm shooting this, it's at the end of December. I still actually have green onions growing in my garden. And I just, whenever, you know, if I ever happen to need to buy green onions from the store, or my son buys them and he'll use them up and leave the little white ends, I just plant them in pots in various places in the garden, so I always have green onions growing, because they will regrow their tops, and then I just keep cutting them back, and then they'll just keep growing back. Every once in a while they'll finally get to a point where they'll completely die back, and then that's why I'll get some more green onions from the store and then plant those too. I'll be setting my little bowl of chopped onion in the, and this is going to be up to a 1/2 cup, in the refrigerator until I'm ready for them. Okay, so now what you want to do is you want to take your sauce and put it on your heat source, whatever it is. I'll be using my wood stove. I'll go ahead and put a little video clip right here and just put it on, like I said, a low to medium low heat, and then just stir it. Keep checking it. Don't let it cook. Don't let it burn to the bottom. Don't let it overcook. And just keep cooking it and stirring it until it gets to the desired thickness that you want the sauce. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the batter for the chicken. This is actually the same batter that I used to make my almond chicken, which I also have a video on and a written recipe that I've posted over on Patreon. I will link to the Patreon post down below, and in that Patreon post you can also find the video link so you can see the recipe and again copy and paste it as is needed. But you know, here's an idea too. If you want a combination, I was kind of thinking of adding some sliced almonds to this orange chicken as well. I might still do that, so it will be an orange almond chicken. That just sounds really good to me. So here's where, this is the great thing about this is I've done this both ways. Like I said, I originally wrote the recipe using rice flour and the arrowroot powder or tapioca starch, or at the time it was cornstarch, but of course that's been changed. But if you would prefer, if you don't have to worry about being gluten-free, which we're not, you can easily substitute the rice flour for a good organic unbleached flour, you know, all-purpose type flour. I've done it both ways and both are very good. So what you need of either your unbleached white flour or your rice flour is 1 cup. So we'll go ahead and pour a cup of that in there. Okay. And then you're going to need 1 cup of the arrowroot or tapioca starch, whichever one it is you get. Or if you do use cornstarch and you can find a good non-GMO organic cornstarch, then that's good too. The other thing you need is a tablespoon of baking powder. So I have this nice little measuring thing in here, which 2 of these, 1 of these is 1.5 teaspoons, so 2 of them put together equals a tablespoon, because there's 3 teaspoons in a tablespoon. I'm finding I really like using this bread whisk quite a bit when it comes to anything that's either a batter or a bread recipe. And I always say this, but thanks, Mary, if you happen to be watching this, again, for the bread whisks. I love them. You don't need to add any salt to the batter. If you do decide to add some, I would say keep it very minimal, like just a pinch. I never add salt to the batter myself. Now, the next thing you're going to need are 3 eggs. So I recommend making a well, let's use my hand here, in the middle of your flour. And if you can do it without tossing it all over the place like I always like to do, well, not really like to, I just do it, then that would be better. I tell you, I just love having chickens. We've had our chickens for several years now, and it's just, I love them. If you don't have chickens yet and you have the space to do it, I recommend getting chickens. They are pretty easy care. Obviously, you do need a good, sturdy place, safe place to keep them away from predators. That's very important. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and lightly beat these eggs together. Okay, so now just pour some water into a measuring cup. The amount you're going to use is going to vary depending on the flours you use and just how thick you want your batter. I like to keep it pretty thick. So a 1/4 cup is what you're going to want to start with, and just kind of pour it in there a little bit at a time. Keep pulling those dry flours, your dry ingredients, into the egg and water mixture as you go. And as you let this sit, as with most such things, especially if you're using a rice flour or any other type of gluten-free flour, they tend to thicken up. So just keep your eye on it. And if you look at it and you decide, you know what, I think I'd like it a little bit thicker than that, because to me, I'm thinking I added just a little bit too much water. But we'll let it sit for a few minutes, since I did use the rice flour, and see if it thickens up on its own. In the meantime, let's get going on that chicken. All right, so what I have here is some already cooked chicken from a whole chicken I baked a couple nights ago. So that's the way I like to do things. Anytime I'm using anything is beef, chicken, whatever, is I always like to bake a whole chicken. So that's what's in here, the remains of that chicken, and I'll still be using some of that for a couple more meals. So this is going to be a matter of choice. You can use raw chicken breast. Traditionally, recipes like this, you usually start with a raw chicken breast meat. So you would want up to 4 chicken breasts that you're going to then chop up. And then I recommend, and if you're going with the raw, then go ahead and let those chicken breast pieces marinate just in a little bit of white wine, especially if you have your own homemade wine. That's a really good option. I find my homemade wine just makes a really excellent marinade. So what I'm doing here is I'm just taking the cooked meat, and the other reason I like using the cooked meat is the cook time makes it quicker, which means I can turn the heat up higher when I'm frying the chicken pieces and get a nice golden brown and not have to worry about whether or not the meat on the inside of it got fully cooked. That's always the concern when you're working with the raw meat. It's like if you want a good golden brown crunchy outside, but you also want it cooked on the inside, it can be tricky setting that temperature just right. And of course the size you cut it's going to make a difference. And then, because I'm a little bit lazy when it comes to this, and just to kind of streamline everything, I like to actually take the chicken, all the chicken pieces, and put them right in the batter. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to throw all of those chicken pieces in there. And then what I like to do is use a big fork and then just gently kind of fold the chicken in there so it gets well coated. Again, how thick you want your batter is going to be up to you. The thicker it is, the better it's going to stick to the chicken, and the thicker it's going to be on the chicken. If you like a thinner batter and you like more chicken and less breadiness, then just go ahead and thin that batter out a little bit more with your water. Okay, and I try to be gentle because since the chicken is cooked, it falls apart easy, but I'm not that worried about it either, because a lot of times what happens is I end up just cooking it in clumps of chicken, and it's really good. It just, to me, makes it even that much better. That's how I do it with the almond chicken as well. Okay, so since it's still really early in the day and I'm not ready to start actually cooking the chicken yet, I will be putting some video clips right here. So what you want is you want to get your oil, and I recommend using coconut oil for frying the chicken in. Not only is it going to make it a little healthier, it's a good, healthy, very heat stable oil. Anyway, get your oil good and hot. I'm really terrible at temperatures because since I do most of this on the wood stove, I would say medium to medium high heat on your conventional stove if that's what you're using. And you'll know when it's ready. Take a little bit of that batter and drop it in there, and if it immediately starts to sizzle and cook and puff up a little bit and then brown, you know it's ready. You don't want it to turn dark brown right away. It's too hot if that's the case. You want it, it should take a couple minutes per side on the chicken. So you put it in there, let it cook for 1 to 2 minutes until it's good and golden brown, or a little bit browner if you like a little darker. Flip it over, and then do the same thing on the other side. And then put your chicken on let it drain on maybe some paper towels, or even if you have scrap fabrics that you just don't know what else to do with. You're like me, you've got tons of scraps always building up, and you've got all the quilts you want and other things. Then do some of those scrap pieces, especially your flannel, and put that under there and let it soak it up, and then that way you can just take that flannel and just burn it or toss it, whatever you want to do. And I wouldn't wash it. You don't want that grease going through your washing machine and through your septic and all that. Then when your chicken's all ready, go ahead and pour your orange sauce over the top, and if you want to, go ahead and sprinkle some sliced almonds on top if that sounds good to you, and then you're all ready to go. Oh yes, and don't forget those green onions if you're like me and you're waiting until later. Anyway, there you go. It's ready to serve. I recommend serving it with a side of some stir-fry veggies and some fried or white rice. Is just really good. And also that sauce, if you made plenty of it and you maybe didn't make as much chicken, but you have a lot of extra sauce, then that sauce is going to be really good over your rice as well. Here's the photos of the finished product. I'm really looking forward to this because it's been a long time since I made the orange chicken. Almond chicken is the one I tend to make more, but every once in a while I just really like to have this nice, more sweeter type flavored chicken, and it's just also a really great way to use up your leftover chicken if you're like me and like to just bake a whole one, even though there's only 2 of you. Oh yes, and don't forget to go find that written recipe. I'll link to it down below. Okay, well, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.